There are wars where the battlefield is a mercy, where death in the mud is kinder than survival under command. In the Imperium of Man, survival is not always a blessing, it is a sentence. And in some forgotten corners of the galaxy, there are lords who rule not by divine right, nor by tactical brilliance, but through cruelty so calculated it might make even a chaos champion pause. These tyrants are not Xenos, not heretics, not demons. They are sanctioned commanders of the Imperium, their deeds authorized, their excesses ignored, because they win. And in the Imperium, victory forgives everything. But what happens to the souls beneath them? To the soldiers who obey every monstrous order? To the civilians caught in silence, too fearful to pray out loud? In a galaxy built on obedience, what does it mean when obedience itself becomes damnation? Beneath the banners and vox-chant sermons, beneath the rust-choked stars and burning manufactorums, there are screams that never reach Terra. This is not the tale of a great war. It is the tale of what war makes men become, and what it leaves behind when it's done with them. Stories like these are scattered, erased, forbidden, but if you want more windows into the silences the Imperium hides, subscribe, share, leave your name among the echoes. The Emperor may not hear, but we will. And sometimes, that's enough to keep one more truth from vanishing. Carthus Ultima did not smell like rot. That would have implied something once lived here. The air was cleaner than that metallic, sterile, sharp with the scent of recycled blood and powdered protein bricks. Life had been boiled down into inputs and quotas, the smell of suffering reduced to the efficient nothing of filtered dust. Somewhere high above, spires pierced cloud-thick smog, but the light never reached the Hebt. Here, day and night were determined only by the volume of the vox grills, which screamed reveille at OV and silence protocol at 2100. Nothing in between resembled time. Lord Varen's voice never rose. It didn't need to. His orders arrived on black-sealed data slates, delivered by servitors whose eyes glowed red when speaking official directives. His presence was felt in the geometry of pain, the spacing of public lashings, the precise calorie shortfall in the daily ration, the way latrine access tokens were earned through denunciations. Not fear. Calculation. Every punishment had purpose. Every reward was a leash. The 11th Carthus penal cohort stood motionless on the drill yard, their armor bleached of insignia. Each of them had committed something once classified as civil betrayal, theft, silence during anthem recital, unauthorized grief. None remembered what they had done anymore. None were allowed to. Their confessions had been submitted, recorded, and deleted. What remained was the obligation to obey without identity, except for one, conscript. Island Marvik still blinked when the sun was mentioned, as if remembering it as more than a symbol. He still etched things in his bunk's underside with a chipped canteen edge, circles, arcs, something that might once have been a face. He still dreamed, though he had trained himself not to speak of it. The rest of the unit didn't hate him. They didn't have the luxury. Emotions not ordered were categorized as wasteful. But sometimes, they watched him longer than they should. And sometimes, they flinched when he smiled. Today, the Vox grill stuttered. A glitch. No more than half a second of silence, but it was enough to freeze everyone in the drill yard. When the voice resumed, it was seamless, but the damage had been done. Discontinuity implied weakness, or change. And in Carthus Ultima, both were punished. The punishment came before the warning. Squad 3 was ordered to formation. They hadn't moved first. They hadn't spoken. But they had blinked at the wrong moment. And so they were lined up before the rest, and made to recite the creed of suppression. I am not the blade. I am the hilt in another's hand. I do not choose. I execute. After the 6th repetition, the lashes began. After the 12th, Marvik turned his head. Not far. Just enough to see. Just enough to breathe disobedience. he was seen. Later, in the interrogation hollow, he was not restrained. Varen did not believe in physical chains. The Commissar Lord sat beneath a single lumen, pale eyes unblinking, gloved hands untouched by any stain. The room's only furniture was a stool with a sharp edge. "You turned your head," Varen said. "I was correcting posture. You turned your head." Silence. "You believe sympathy makes you human." Marvik didn't answer. Varen continued, voice still even. "Sympathy is a malfunction. The Emperor requires obedience, not sorrow, not awareness. You will erase the impulse, or it will be excised." It wasn't a threat. Varen didn't threaten. He stated future events. Marvik was released without injury. That was the most terrifying part. In the barracks, his return was marked by silence. Even the coughing stopped. He climbed to his bunk, lay down, stared at the ceiling, etched another circle with the canteen. That night, the rations were increased by 12%. Anomaly. No explanation. A small silver token was placed on every bunk and marked unfamiliar. The next morning, a Vox transmission arrived, stating, "Without emotion, the additional rations were provided in response to exemplary obedience observed during correction procedure. Tokens denote trust. Loss of token denotes guilt." No one knew what the tokens meant. No one wanted to, but they wore them, clutched them, hid them. The barracks changed. Eyes turned inward. The silence thickened, not with unity, but with calculation. Marvik never received a token. He continued marching, continued obeying. But his shadow grew longer on the wall each day. Not metaphorically. Literally, the lumen strips in his corridor flickered only when he passed. The light distorted, stretched, and someone began etching his name near the latrine. No one ever saw who, in a hive of 10 million obedient souls. One dream was contagion. Varen responded, the only way he knew how. He made hope itself a crime. A new order was issued. Tokens would now be traded, not kept. Each soldier must offer their token to another within 48 hours, with written justification. Those who failed would be categorized as isolated elements and reassigned. It worked. 2 days later, the barracks had no names, only numbers. Marvik's number was changed, then changed again, then removed. He didn't sleep. He stood at the wall and watched the lumen flicker. The ceiling whispered things only he could hear. The wall pulsed once, like breath. On the 7th day, the Vox grill cracked. The voice came through wrong, no longer. Varen's tone, higher, quieter, it said. "He still sees the sun." Then, silence. The next morning, all data slates were confiscated. Every lumen strip replaced. Each Vox unit reset. No explanation given. Marvik was reassigned to waste reclamation, a demotion without precedent. A punishment without violence. He entered the recycler zone, beneath the manufacturum subshafts. Alone. The first thing he found was a child's toy. Wooden, hand-carved, illegal. It had eyes, and it was still warm. The massacre was called a training exercise. That was the official phrasing stamped across the data slates, repeated in Vox briefings, etched into the penalty ledgers. The barracks knew better. It had started with one screaming authorized, unsanctioned, not part of the weekly drill schema. Then came gunfire, not in formation, not in rhythm. Then silence so absolute it felt manufactured. They were told nothing. But in the following cycles, 34 bunks were stripped. Their occupants vanished. Uniforms recycled. Bedding incinerated. The bunk numbers themselves reassigned. Their sequence broken and rebuilt, as if nothing had ever occupied those slots. The survivors were not allowed to mourn. They were not allowed to remember. A new order appeared in the Vox chambers, transmitted twice daily. Loyalty is the erasure of what preceded obedience. The 11th Carthus penal cohort was not designed for questioning, but even still, something fractured. Words were spoken slower. Movements grew hesitant. not out of fear, but confusion. There had been no warning, no infraction, just an example, and in its absence, every action became suspect. Not just the disobedient ones. Very breath became potential sedition. Commissar Lord Varen understood morale the way an engine understands friction. Inevitable, corrosive, to be minimized and harnessed only when controlled. So he did not ban mourning. He banned morale itself. A new infraction code was posted on the internal code read Sepinol. Emotional encouragement or signs of positive reinforcement under combat or non-combat conditions. Punishment. Immediate reassignment to isolation unit, Benel. They stopped talking after that. Even during rations. They ate in sequence, down the line, eyes lowered. Bread rations now came stamped with numbers. Taste was irrelevant. The chewing became timed. Once someone tried humming, just one note, not even a song. He was removed before his second bite. No one knew what happened to him. They didn't ask. Sleep, once a moment of retreat, now required prior confession. Before lights out, each soldier stood before a blank slate and recited their thoughts. Not sins, not feelings, thoughts. Each confession was stored, indexed, and then wiped. They were told the Emperor does not require memory-only process. Private Jereme Kleist began stuttering. It wasn't fear. It was the consequence of trying to measure every syllable before speaking. Even his own name became a minefield. So he stopped saying it. His fellow bunkmates didn't correct him. Names were inefficient. Names became grief. Marvik did not return. No one mentioned him, but at night, someone kept folding his bedding. Not one person, a different one each cycle. No orders, no rotation, but every morning his cot looked slept in, not clean, not fresh, just untouched by time, as if pretending he had never left would keep the cycle from noticing it didn't. New orders came. Bunks with no occupants would now be removed entirely, cat and frame and floor tile beneath. In their place, new steel blocks were installed and marked, without bedding, meant to remind or erase. That was when the laughter happened. No one knows who laughed first. It wasn't joy. It was cracked, desperate, like air escaping a decompression lock. 1 second of it, maybe 2. Not long, but loud enough to breach Vox protocols. The punishment was collective. Every soldier in block. Theta was ordered to rewatch the training footage of the corrective engagement from 6 days earlier, from beginning to end, in silence, with no helmets, no protective filters. They watched men they knew die, again and again, from 3 angles. Then a 4th, rendered from drone footage. Then again, slowed down, annotated. Names were blurred, but the faces weren't. One soldier vomited. He was removed before his knees hit the floor. The next morning, none of them spoke, not even during confession. The Vox grills played static instead of orders for 1 full hour. Then a new voice came on. Not Varen, a scribe, likely, younger, unsure. It said, simply, all confessions will now be anonymized. Individuality is not required for salvation. That day, no one saluted. Not because they forgot, but because no one knew who to salute anymore. Command had become a frequency, punishment, a schedule, in the barracks. The lights dimmed slightly earlier, but no one slept. They lay awake, eyes open, not from fear, but from uncertainty. If no names remained, if no memories were safe, if no joy could be allowed, what was left to obey? And if there was nothing left to obey, then what, precisely, were they still serving? Then something happened. A soldier who had not spoken in 3 weeks began whispering in the dark. Not words, sounds, syllables, some rhythmic, some slurred. At first, they thought it was breakdown. But then, another soldier picked it up, repeated it, matched the cadence. Then another dot. It wasn't speech, it was memory, a pattern they had shared once, a chant used during childhood drills. Meaningless, forgotten, but familiar, and that familiarity was enough to survive one more night. No punishment came, which made it worse, because it meant they hadn't been heard, or that they had been, and someone had chosen to listen and do nothing. 2 days later, Private Kleist was reassigned, his bunk removed, his name deleted from the roster. But he had never spoken, never confessed. No infractions, no logs, only the stutter and the quiet dot in his place. The servo skull hovered now, recording, unblinking, watching not for rebellion, but for grief. Loyalty now meant silence. Silence meant forgetting, and forgetting meant survival. They stopped folding Marvik's bed, but no one touched the wall behind it, where a circle had once been etched in soot. They pretended it wasn't there, but none of them slept facing that direction. The chapel district once echoed with the regulated cadence of ecclesiarchal hymns, recorded, archived, pre-approved by segmentum doctrine. Now, it echoed with silence, not absence, but suppression. The old sermons had been deemed obsolete, not heretical, not corrupt, just insufficient. They did not inspire the kind of obedience Varen required. Reverence was not enough. He demanded replication. The first icon appeared overnight, a standard-sized relief, carved not in gold leaf or sacred bronze, but in scorched sand, where once the Emperor's face had loomed, serene and wrathful in equal measure. Now, a new face stared out, long, narrow, eyeless. Lord Varen's face, no inscription, just shape, and the curve of a commissarial cap rendered into the stained frame like a wound. The ecclesiarchy filed no protest. They had been reduced to protocol monitors weeks earlier. Any deacon who questioned the shift found themselves reassigned to ash procession duty, walking circuit of outer hab sectors where incinerated bodies were transported on wheeled pyres, their names read once and then scrubbed from the archives. It was not exile. It was obedience, recontextualized. The sermons changed too. They were no longer spoken by priests. They were read from Pain Slate's thin black tablets that could only be activated through physical contact with a regulation brand discipline wand. Every word required pressure. The deeper the indentation, the louder the transmission. The longer the phrase, the greater the voltage fed back through the wand into the speaker's skin. No priest delivered a full sermon more than twice, not because they died, but because they began to see the face of the Lord, not as scripture, but as Mira. Preacher Hallex had once delivered emperor liturgies 2000s. Her voice had carried through cathedral vaults like fire through dry parchment. Now she could barely whisper. Her eyes, once clear, had grown clouded. She did not name it blindness. She called it clarity unfiltered. During one ash slate recitation, she faltered not from pain, but hesitation. A passage commanded the flock to offer their tears, not to the emperor's statue, but to Varen's shrine. She paused, just a second, long enough for the wand to overload. Her right arm spasmed, her voice stuttered, but she finished. The next morning, the sermon was corrected, the hesitation edited out, her voice replaced with a synthetic reconstruction. The people still came, not out of faith, but because attendance was now linked to ration continuation. Chapel attendance slates were scanned at the gate. Missed a day, and your hydration privilege reset. Missed 3, and you were reassigned to sanitation immersion, a euphemism for being submerged in reclamation. Run off until one forgot how to speak without retching. Children were brought to, not by choice. Schools had been consolidated into the chapel district, not to learn scripture, but to witness it in the back row of the chapel's western wing. A child no older than 7 raised her hand during the 5th ash recital. No one had taught her to do that. Preacher Hallex, now too weak to rise unaided, turned her head. The child did not speak loudly, but the silence made her words ring. "Father of Fire," she said. "That's his name, right?" The words were not punished. They were recorded, amplified, adopted. Double quotes, "Father of Fire," appeared on the next cycle's banners. Not as correction but as revelation. The faith had evolved. Organically, Varen's decree claimed, blessed by innocence. A child had named a truth the adults had feared, and that lie became flesh. New statues were commissioned, not through artisans, but through auto-fabricators keyed to surveillance imagery. Varen's face appeared not just on the chapel walls, but on ration dispensers, on waste collectors, on the inside of drinking vessels. Liturgical recitations now included a fifth stanza, praising the flame that thinks. A new rite was introduced. Every day, before curfew, each citizen was required to recite the ash benediction. 7 words, etched in the palms of their hands with ash and bone powder. I burn. I serve. I do not question. Refusal was categorized as spiritual dissonance. Treatment involved silence. Tanks emerged Vox isolation chambers where external stimuli were stripped away until only the voice of the Father remained. It was not Varen's actual voice. It was a layered construct, part synthetic, part archival, part whisper. It repeated phrases in no discernible order. Some were known, some had never been spoken publicly. One subject emerged, claiming they'd heard their mother's voice, despite her having died during the hive wall collapse years prior. No investigation followed. Faith does not require coherence. Outside the chapel district, the city changed to ash became fashion, not by style, but enforcement. White garments were banned, yellow deemed arrogant. Only grays, blacks, and reds were permitted. Crimson was reserved for those who had completed 7 consecutive weeks of silence tanks without psychological deviation. They were named Ember Accepted. They didn't speak anymore. They didn't blink. Either in the outer hab sectors, a different kind of prayer began to emerge. Not spoken, not written. Scratched into walls, drawn in ration crumbs. It wasn't Varen's face. It wasn't the Emperor's either. Just a shape, circular, shifting, sometimes open, sometimes closed. It had no name, no voice, but it kept reappearing, and each time someone found it, something in them remembered how to breathe through the panic. Varen's doctrine had no answer for that, but he didn't need one. His sermons continued. The ash flowed, and the children now bowed too. Statues with no eyes, not because they believed, but because it was the only thing left to look at. The Baneblade designated virtue through purge had not moved in 3 years. Its treads were locked beneath layers of ritual sediment, incense ash, and formaldehyde-soaked flowers laid by the Ember Accepted during liturgical parades. No engine cycled. No vox array stirred. Yet, each night, at the same hour 3:17, Localit's hull emitted a sound too organic to be coincidence. It wasn't alarm. It wasn't a malfunction. It groaned. The tech priests stationed within Subforge, Theta dismissed it as spiritual leakage, resonant data ghosts left behind by incomplete Binharic rites. But Magos rest in Vale, recently reactivated from reserve stasis due to attrition among senior engineers, heard something else. He logged it, studied it, and after 3 cycles of discrete Uspex recordings, he fed the sound into a pattern translator once used to decode battlefield encryption. The result returned a match. It mirrored the frequency of wounded Grox. He recalibrated. This time, the match was more specific. Human exhalation under suppressive pressure. A death rattle, mechanical, but unmistakably modeled after pain. He filed a report. No response, so he filed a second. This time masked as a routine maintenance anomaly. He was summoned to the Manufactorum Shrine. Not by voice, by flame. A red incense plume burned above the substation, a signal from the Ember Accepted. Upon arrival, he was met by a servitor with gold-plated teeth and no jaw. It communicated through eye blinks. Binary bursts projected into his cortex through invasive synaptic hooks. The message was clear: do not pursue. The groaning was not sanctioned. He returned to his quarters. The next night, the Baneblade wept. He saw it himself. Not through Ospec, not through lens, through his own oil-scabbed eyes. A thin line of black coolant traced from the hull's corner. Like a tear, it hissed when it touched the forge floor. Corrosive sacred. UNPERMITTED. No logs recorded it. He attempted to commune with the machine spirit. He performed the hymn of unclouded directive, a sequence designed for mechanical reconciliation. The engine did not respond, but the lights above flickered, and somewhere in the substation's rear, an old servitor slumped mid-execution cycle. Its task: reloading a bolt pistol after ceremonial discharge. During a prisoner's ritual cleansing. Its fault: pausing after the first click, then whispering a word. Not a machine word. Not BINH, Eric. A name. Island. The same name scratched once into the barracks wall. The same circle drawn beneath a bunk no one spoke of. Mago's Veil ran diagnostics. No corruption. No warp trace. No programming glitch. Just a fragment of sound lodged in the dead man's mouth. The servitor was decommissioned. Its head removed and fed into the auto-cremator. That night, the Baneblade groaned again. So did a Chimera in Base 6, then a Valkyrie in Hangar Delta, grounded for over a decade, each with different tones, but the same cadence. Like breath, the forge workers began to speak in hushed tones. Not of rebellion, not of freedom, of memory. Some said the machines were haunted, others said they were remembering, not their blueprints, but their pain, because every one of them had seen war, not just as weapon, but as witness. Mago's Veil submitted a final report. 3 pages. No flourishes. No claims, just recordings. Attached with it, a request for right reinstatement, a ceremony last performed before Varen's rise. It was known as the Litany of Harmonization, used only when a machine's spirit was declared grief-struck, its will damaged not by heresy, but by trauma. He received no reply. Instead, his access was revoked, his quarters sealed, his mechadendrites disabled via remote override. He was placed under observational suspension, a euphemism for waiting to see whether a priest would go mad or useful. During this period, the machines grew louder. Unmarked skittery began patrolling the forges, not to guard, but to listen. The engines no longer groaned on schedule. They wailed at random, no longer at 3:17, now at 9:06, then 14:11, then overlapping. A war chant forming from grief, someone no one claimed, responsibility, etched a phrase into the side of the virtue through purge, just beneath the autocannon mount. We remember who died inside us. The words were scrubbed within the hour, the plating replaced. But the next day, the Baneblade's engine sparked spontaneously, burning 3 observers alive. No one claimed sabotage, because sabotage implied control, and nothing about the machine's pain was directed. It was expression. For the first time in Carthus, Ultima's recorded history, an exorcism. Rite was issued for a vehicle, not warp-tainted. Not demon-bound, just sad. The rite failed. The priest who performed it went blind after speaking the 5th verse. He said he saw an eye behind the engine, not mechanical. Not divine, just tired. Magos Veil was relocated, not punished, not purged, made custodian of the old servitor crypt. A silent place, full of machines, that once had mouths. He walks its halls now, listening sometimes. One of them twitches. Not in malfunction, in memory, and somewhere beneath all the metal and code and prayer, something old is learning to mourn. Not to rise, not to rebel, just to be heard. The dust didn't fall on Carthus Ultima. It rose, from the cracks in the subhabs, from the cracks in people, from the old bones of wars that no one recorded anymore. The ash was perpetual, and it was in that veil of industrial decay that the visitor arrived, not saluted, just present. He wore white. That was the first obscenity. His retinue of scribes and data depths moved like carrion around him, thin figures with servo quills instead of tongues. The Vox towers fell silent during his descent, not by accident. The protocols had been preemptively purged by orbiting command. Not even Varen had access to his arrival data. His name was Lord Vetten of Segmentum Obscurus, High Command, bearer of the radiant seal of calibrated compliance. His ship, Cold Benediction, remained in low orbit, its weapons charged, but hidden. He did not smile when Varen bowed. He only asked one question: how often do they beg? Varen did not flinch. Begging is classified as performative disobedience under current discipline codes. It is repressed at induction. Vetten blinked, as if hearing a heresy dressed as efficiency. Then you've bled them to clean. The tour began without ceremony. Vetten declined the observation drone feed. He wanted to see it from the ground. First, the chapel district. He walked beneath the ash icons bearing Varen's face and nodded once, not in approval, but recognition. He'd seen worse. He'd seen better. When the child bowed to the statue and whispered, "Father of Fire," he asked no questions. He did not note it. His scribe, however, murmured, "Emergent idolatry stage 3. The quill scratched. A number was recorded. Next, the manufactorum sectors. The servitors, in synchronized decay. The baneblade that moaned at dusk. The silenced priests. He watched a skittery ranger walk into a cogitator bay and simply sit, no programming to explain it. It didn't move for hours. No one knew if it had been ordered to stop. A symptom, Vetten said, not a signal. Repression must never reach apathy. If it rots too far, they stop reacting. Then all you have is rot. Varen offered no defense. He knew better. The barracks came last. Vetten ordered a random inspection. Block Theta. No time to clean, to prepare. He wanted the raw view. The soldiers stood motionless, uniforms threadbare. Tokens hung around their necks like rusted charms. One bunk bore no sheets, just a soot mark where a name had once been. Vetten stopped. Who slept there? No one answered. He turned. Did anyone sleep there? Silence. He smiled. Perfect. He ordered a sermon to be held on the spot. No preacher, no ash-slate, just a laspistol. He pointed it to the ceiling and said, "Speak the names of those you've outlived." No one spoke. Then, from the far end, a soldier coughed. Not speech, not even defiance, just weakness. That was enough. The soldier was dragged forward. No trial, no classification. The charge was clear: disruption of calibrated silence. The punishment was left open. Vetten offered the laspistol to Varen. Varen took it. He aimed, fired a clean hole through the heart. No blood. The corpse collapsed soundlessly. Vetten leaned in, whispered, "To clean again." Then he smiled wider. "You trained them well, Lord Commissar, but training ends when the subject stops reacting. You must maintain elasticity in suffering. Give them just enough air to choke on." That night, 5 new protocols were issued from orbit. Ration cycle variability, unpredictability in food portions to increase stress index, memory reinsertion, trials reintroducing censored images of lost comrades, then punishing emotional response. Ceremonial failure drills, enacting rituals that always end in unexplained punishment, to instill liturgical dread. Ember reversals, occasional reclassification of Ember accepted as heretics, without explanation. Child, confessional splits, siblings, assigned contradictory truths and punished if their testimonies align. These were not errors. They were doctrine. Vetan's adepts called them graded collapse vectors. The purpose was not destruction. It was preservation of obedience through the management of despair's thresholds. Carthus Ultima became a testing ground. Other worlds would follow. On the third night, a banquet was held, not in celebration, in observation. Inside an old administratum dome, repurposed into an echo chamber, Varen and Vetan sat surrounded by thin figures, servants with shovels instead of plates. The food was unmarked gray meat. No one asked what it was. The ash settled onto the platters like seasoning. Vetan raised his glass. Here's to the dust, the only harvest that never fails. Varen did not drink. The glass remained in front of him, untouched. He had begun to understand what came next. This inspection was not about him. It was about calibration. Vetan wasn't testing Carthus Ultima. He was measuring its expiry. If it was too efficient, it would no longer serve as a lesson. And lessons are only useful if they still scream by morning. New banners were hung on not with Varen's face, but with the symbol of Segmentum Obscurus High Command, a blindfolded Aquila, wings spread, talons empty below it. A single phrase in High Gothic: obedience is the only truth worthy of pain. Varen issued no protest. He simply walked to the Ash District, stood before his own icon, and watched a child trace its jawline in the soot. Then he turned, and for the first time since assuming command, he ordered a statue removed, not destroyed, just buried, where the ash would hide it. And maybe, in time, remember, they did not call it an orphanage. There were no mothers, no fathers, no assigned grief. The place was designated Habdetritus, Disaciati, Delta, a collapsed sector beneath a former transport line, now partially sealed by ferrocrete shifts and forgotten administratum schedules. 100 children lived there, none older than 10 standard years, none younger than memory. They were born under regulation, not care. Their birth dates were logged only as service potential times. Names were not given. They were assigned by function. Red for those with ocular sharpness, gray for those with stamina, black for those who didn't cry. The quietest were selected first. The loudest were reprocessed. They did not play. They did not know what play was. Their hours were structured into drills, calibration games, speech suppression exercises. 1 hour per day was granted for creative decomposition, a term that once meant rest, but had been translated into silent, drawing on rusted slate boards using chalk made from compressed bone ash. In this hour, strange things happened. One child drew circles, always the same, overlapping, tight, precise. She didn't know why. She never looked at the other children while doing it. Another child designated Gray 7 drew a line above a line, then raised. When asked what it was, he whispered, "The sun." He was taken that night. No punishment, no ceremony, just gone. His bunk was reassigned within the hour, chalk scrubbed, his blanket folded by another child who no longer remembered who had used it before, but something lingered. 1. Child Red 3 began blinking more often, not as a tick, as a code. At first, the others ignored it. Then they began to match it, blink for blink, a pattern. No adult intervened, because no adult watched closely. The supervisors were servitors, stripped of voice, built to record only screams. There were none, until the night the angel appeared. Black 2, the smallest among them, claimed he saw something descend past the crack in the ferrocrete ceiling. A shape of light. Not white, just brighter than anything else in their world. He whispered about wings. Not feathers. Not metal. Something else, he whispered to Red 3. Red -3 didn't respond. But the next day, during silent slate hour, she drew not circles. She drew a figure, no face, just wings, and beneath it, a circle that looked too much like a sun. That night, she vanished too, but the drawing remained, and for the first time, A supervisor took notice. The drawing was not scrubbed. It was extracted, carried away in a sealed box by a figure not in uniform. No name, no insignia. Just robes deep, crimson, etched with a sigil none of the children had ever seen. After that, changes came. The silent hour was removed. In its place, reflective conditioning. The children were made to kneel in rows, facing lumen strips that pulsed with soft white and droned low vox hums, tuned to suppress cortical variance. No more chalk. No more slate. Only empty hands. But the memory did not fade. The children began to hum, not tunes, just rhythm. Soft. Mismatched. Disjointed. But still something more than silence. One child black 7 began arranging crumbs on the floor, in patterns, sometimes circles, sometimes lines. Once, he placed them in the shape of a single word, island. He was removed. But that night, the servitor that swept the floor malfunctioned. It didn't erase the crumbs, it rearranged them into a sun by dawn. The entire cohort had changed, not in defiance, in posture. They sat straighter, walked with symmetry, blinking in patterns again, not taught, not ordered, just shared. The behavior was logged, not suppressed, just filed. Someone higher up began to watch. One by one, the children were evaluated. Some were transferred, not to service to something else. No records, no farewells, and each time, the others forgot them faster, not by will, but by structure. New vox tones were played in their sleeping quarters, subaudible frequencies designed to disrupt memory consolidation. Effective, efficient. The next day, no one remembered who Black 2 had been, but the drawings returned, not on slate, scratched into the floor with fingernails, etched into the walls with bone splinters. The figure with wings, the sun. The circles, and beneath it all, a pattern of dots that no one could read, but everyone followed. One night, a scribe from Segmentum Command entered the chamber. She asked a simple question. "What are you learning?" The children didn't respond, until one barely visible, buried in the corner, whispered back, "We're remembering what we weren't told." The scribe left without comment. 2 days later, the cohort was dissolved. The children were split, relocated, dispersed across Carthus, Ultima's sectors. Some went to manufactorums, some to barracks. A few were simply never logged again. Their old dwelling was sealed, not burned, not collapsed, sealed. A single picked slate was left behind. A child's drawing, circle, wings, and a sun, smiling, but the teeth were wrong. Too many, and beneath it, the words, "He watches us when they forget." The pict was catalogued, then filed, then marked as corrupted, because it had no origin, and none of the remaining children could remember drawing it, because that was the point. The ash carried no wind. It simply drifted, independent of atmosphere or logic, folding through corridors and under doors with the steady patience of rot. In the Psychona subspire, located beneath Carthus Ultima's secondary communications tower, the sanctioned psychers did not sleep anymore. They closed their eyes, but sleep refused to visit. What came instead were fragments and finished sentences spoken in voices not their own. Memories they never lived, dreams with no beginning and no end. At first, it was dismissed as residual warp distortion from an unshielded beacon relay. The local astropath chorus had long reported flickers, fluctuations in emotion tone, linguistic inversions, psychic bleed, but this was different. These were not visions. These were moments. Psychoanalyst Tyrann was the first to document it. He transcribed a sequence he could not remember receiving. The parchment bore the words he does not speak, because he already wept. He had no memory of writing it, no knowledge of its context, yet it appeared in his hand in perfect Gothic, written with his own pen. The Oversight Council ordered him scanned. No warp trace, no demon signature, just memory. That was the beginning. Others began reporting similar fragments. One psyker dreamed of a soldier in scorched armor walking through a firestorm without burning. The soldier's face changed with each step. First, an officer, then a priest, then a child. He carried no weapon, only a banner, blank, frayed, unclaimed. Another saw Veronat, commanding, not triumphant, but kneeling in a field of ash, naked and weeping, as a circle of silent figures watched him from the edge of vision. They did not move, but the sense was clear. They were waiting. Still another dreamed of the golden throne, but it was empty, not abandoned, never filled. The light behind it pulsed, not gold, but something colder. And where the emperor should have sat, only a mirror remained, cracked, smoldering. No. Two visions were identical, but the patterns aligned. The voice in each was the same, not shouting, not whispering, and never from above, always from behind. Varen ordered immediate memory purges. The affected psychers were sequestered, sedated, injected with mnemonic nulls and recursive blanking sequences. The visions stopped for 5 hours, then returned with greater clarity. This time, they didn't appear only in sleep. They emerged during drills, during meals, once, during an execution. The headsman dropped his pistol mid-sentence, tears streaking his face. He stared at the condemned and said, without knowing why, he died facing the wrong direction. That's why the fire wouldn't take him. The execution was paused, then carried out. Anyway, but the word spread. Rumors like fungus fed on silence. The Psyker Corps was restructured. A new subdivision was created. Whisper analysis. No official documentation, no nameplates. Just a sigil burned into the door, a circle intersected by a single line. Inside, the adepts began to catalog the phenomenon. The first truth they found. The messages were not coming from the warp. There were no demonic signatures, no psychic resonance that indicated intrusion. The shadows came not from beyond. They came from behind, from before, from memory. It was not prophecy, it was recollection. But of things no one remembered. One vision repeated across multiple subjects. A battlefield made entirely of ash, stretching beyond vision, where soldiers walked in perfect silence, their armor unmarked, their banners blank, their eyes black, not corrupted, not dead, just forgotten. At the center of this vision stood a single figure, not Varan, not the Emperor, a man, or perhaps a shadow of one dot. When approached, he whispered, "You remember because you were not permitted to know." Each time this vision ended, the Psyker awoke crying, but not in fear, in relief. As if released, the Oversight Committee grew alarmed, but the machine cult refused to assist. The tech priests of Carthus Ultima had grown too withdrawn, too busy studying the groaning tanks, the malfunctioning the memory echoes embedded in dead circuit boards, so the Psykers were left to isolate themselves. They began drawing, not with permission, on walls, on their own skin. Symbols repeated again and again. A banner, a circle. A name no one had spoken aloud in months. Il-N. The Oversight Committee issued an emergency sanction. Any Psyker referencing the name would be subjected to immediate neural overwrite the next day. 5 Psykers turned themselves in, smiling. None resisted the purge, but none screamed, either. And when their minds were scanned post-procedure, a single sentence was found embedded in the echo layers of their hippocampal maps. You can erase the name, but not the shape. That night, a servitor designated Archive Delta malfunctioned mid-transcription. Instead of copying prayer formulas, it began to chant in binary, over and over. He walks the fire backwards so we can burn forward. The chant lasted 7 hours, then stopped. The servitor's head collapsed, not exploded, not damaged, collapsed inward. as if crushed from within by pressure. No machine should feel. The Whisper Analysis Unit was shut down, officially dissolved, but the door remained, and the sigil was not removed. In the empty corridors of the Psyker barracks, no one knew who painted a mural in chemical ash. It showed a soldier walking into fire, not afraid, not proud, just returning, and behind him, shadows watched, some with blank helmets, some with nothing at all. The mural was scrubbed the next morning, but the ash returned the day after. Even now, no Psyker dares speak the visions aloud, not because of fear, but because they all understand. Now these are not warnings, they are invitations, and the ash is not dust, it is memory, waiting to be worn again. The rebellion wasn't even classified, it never made it to the formal slate logs. The insurgents were unarmed, civilians, failed workers from Hab Sector 9 Gamma, where oxygen controls had malfunctioned for 9 days before being restored by a single tech priest to Junior to authorize repairs. 33 people died in that time. When air returned, the survivors did not cheer. They just stopped moving. That, too, was marked as sedition, so Varen sent the 17th Suppression Unit veterans, not penal conscripts. Men and women who had earned their rank through obedience, unmarred by thought. They moved like muscle memory, boots falling in sync before the order even finished transmission. Sergeant Isk Voln led them. He had served since the hive wall collapse, 31 years prior. His commendations lined half a vault wall in Varen's own sanctum. Not that he'd ever seen them. Voln had no interest in legacy, only efficiency, and his orders were simple. Quell, disperse, report. They entered 9 Gamma through the lower breacher service tunnel, clogged with melted piping and mold-flaked rebreather masks. The air was thin, but navigable. The rebels had no weapons. They'd used furniture to block access corridors, makeshift barriers, slagged pictures. Someone had written, "We still breathe" across a wall in oil.volane, gave no speech, no threats. He advanced, pulse-readied, lasgun in hand, then stopped, because a child stepped into the corridor. Small, barefoot, covered in ash. She raised her hand. Not to beg. Not to threaten, to show. Something. In her palm sat a disc-smooth metal, old, stamped not with the aquila, but with a single engraved circle. Voln lowered his weapon, just slightly. His second in command, Kesh, stepped forward. "Orders, Sergeant." Voln didn't answer, because something inside him had moved, not shifted, reawakened. He had seen this child before, not her face, her posture, the way she stood, unblinking, in front of rifles that had no right to hesitate. He'd seen it on the day he was inducted, before his first execution. A boy, his own age, tied to a post, refusing to cry. Voln had shot him without blinking, but his finger had trembled for 3 hours afterward. He never told anyone, but now that tremble returned, and it spread. He looked back at his squad. Kashharn, Droven, all silent, all waiting, all watching the child, and behind her, shadows moved, adults. Old, too tired to raise hands, too angry to kneel. Not a rebellion, a gathering, and none of them looked afraid. Voln made a decision. He holstered his weapon. Cash said nothing. Neither did the others. They set down their rifles, one by one. No mutiny, no declaration, just silence, and that silence spread faster than any shot. The message was relay delayed, distorted, obfuscated. Varen did not react immediately, not because he doubted their loyalty, but because he understood. They hadn't turned. They had seen when the response came. It was surgical. No orbital strike, no mass purge, just reclassification. The 17th Suppression Unit was marked as functionally expired, their records scrubbed, their names assigned to fresh conscripts. Officially, they had died in a storage collapse. Unofficially, they were sent to Sector Null, outside the Hive's mapping grid, a place with no doors, only echo chambers and waste tunnels. Exile, but not execution, because execution absolves, exile remembers. Inside Sector Null, Vaughn and his squad were left alone. No food deliveries, no orders, no light, save what filtered through the cracks. The air was foul, but breathable. They found walls with symbols already carved, circles, lines, dot lines, and once a name. IL-N. None of them spoke it, but Vaughn traced it with his fingers, and when he closed his eyes, he did not see battles. He saw the boy. Again. The one he killed. The one who didn't. Flinch. The pain that followed was not guilt. It was recognition. He had never stopped being that boy. He had simply forgotten. Now, in the darkness, they remembered. One of the squadroven began to draw. He wasn't an artist. He'd executed 3 muralists for iconographic indulgence. But now, with bone and soot, he began to map the walls, not with plans, with dreams. Figures and fire, a throne made of glass. Eyes in the ash cache, once the most brutal, began speaking in fragments. I saw the banner, she whispered. It was blank. Vaughn listened, and when he finally spoke, it was not a command, it was a story about a battle that never made the records, about a soldier who walked into a reactor chamber to save children he wasn't ordered to protect, about the silence that followed when he returned, and how no one ever spoke of it again. That soldier had no name, but his eyes had the same tremble. It was not redemption. They hadn't earned that. It was not rebellion. They had no flag. It was the pain of knowing, of waking. Of being left alive after memory returned. And in that exile, they found others. Not soldiers, not PSYKERS, just forgotten people who had never stopped remembering together. They watched the ash fall, and they listened to the sound it made when it touched old wounds. Astropath 2nd grade. Myatrus did not hear voices the way others imagined. The warp did not speak in whispers or screams. It folded. Time buckled under it, and meaning spilled sideways. Most messages arrived half-formed, buried in static or laced with fear. Clean signals were rare. Clear ones, almost mythed up, which is why he nearly dismissed the pulse when it came. It was short, faint, buried behind an encrypted trade manifest from a forge world, no longer in operation. The signal's rhythm didn't match any current astropathic formatting, and yet, there it was, consistent, pulsing, patient, not repeating, waiting. He isolated the frequency. 12 minutes later, the noise resolved, not into code, into voice, old, not by age, but by dust. The kind of voice recorded before the sector used Voxel standard. Grainy, wounded, civilian. I do not know if anyone will ever hear this. I do not know if I have the right to be heard, but I remember, and that has become a crime. Mihitris sat still. He hadn't initiated a decryption, hadn't requested translation. But the words continued. I was Clercaselan, Ralia, Vest of Carthus Ultima's 9th Bureau. I filed energy distributions. I calculated rations. I believed that was enough. Then came Varen. The voice trembled not with fear, with memory. He was not always Commissar Lord. He was not even Commissar. He arrived as a consultant, assigned to increase efficiency, and we let him, because efficiency sounded like survival. Mihitris checked the signal source. No return node, no Astridenci. Just blank space, the voice continued. At first, he removed redundancies. That meant people. Then he revised morale standards. That meant silence. Then he rewrote the oaths. Her breathing hitched. By then, I was filing forms I couldn't read. Orders passed through me without explanation. Executions were scheduled like transport runs. I asked a question once. Just one. The next day, my office wall was repainted. Red, not with paint. Mahitras rose from his chair. He didn't know why. He checked his slate. Nothing showed. No record of transmission. No data log. The signal existed only in his mind. And yet it continued. I began recording these thoughts in the gaps. Not in protest. Not even in hope. Just to remember what my own voice sounded like. Every night, I whispered into a sealed archive scroll and burned the paper after. A pause, then I lied. Another breath. I didn't burn all of them. I hid one. Just one. Inside a conduit node, behind the central archive in Sector 3 Gamma. No one ever found it. I don't know if it matters, but it was the only thing I did that was mine. The signal pulsed again. Softer. I know I won't survive. Not because of execution, because I've already begun to forget. Names, faces, even colors. Everything here becomes gray, eventually. Then silence. For a full minute. Then, I dreamt once. Of a room filled with ash, and a child tracing a sun on the floor. And I remember thinking, even then, that I had never seen the sun. Not really. Only diagrams. Only declarations. And I wanted, so badly, to believe it was warm. The voice cracked. I leave this not as truth, but as noise. Let it haunt someone. Let it annoy the silence. That would be enough. Then, I remember a name, Islan. I never knew who he was, but someone once whispered it in a stairwell before being taken. That whisper has never left me. Then, nothing, no signature, no final plea, just air. The signal ended. Mahitras remained still for hours. No voice followed. No command arrived. But he knew what he had to do. He waited until the next sanctioned astropathic transmission. Window opened a routine update relay to Segmentum archives. He added no new message, no warning, just embedded a copy of the signal inside a routine medical audit, camouflaged, obscured, but untouched. He knew the penalty if discovered. Astropaths were not messengers. They were conduits. But he also knew what he had felt. Not power, not heresy, truth. The next day, the auditing servo assigned to his quarters was reassigned. The Vox chamber air scrubbers were replaced. A blank data appeared on his cot. Nothing written. But he knew what it meant. Someone else had heard it and chosen not to stop it. He walked to the archive and 3 Gamma Dot found the wall conduit. Inside, dust, metal, worn, a single scroll, decayed beyond salvage. But etched into the wall behind it, burned into the ferrocrete, in shaking script. The voice you hear is your own, remembering itself. Mahitras did not file a report. He did not record the coordinates. He did not seek permission. Instead, he returned to his chamber and began writing. Not prophecy, not revelation, a list of names, of people he never met, but now could not forget. Ralia Vest.il-N.Black-2.Red-3.Isk. Volane. Each one a whisper the Imperium had failed to erase. Each one a wound that silence could no longer cover. And when he was done, he sealed the slate, filed it in the outbound queue. Not to Terra, to nowhere, to wherever the ash drifted. And maybe, someday, someone else would hear. Not to change the galaxy, but to remember that it had once tried. No alarm sounded when it happened. No klaxons. No mass scramble. No breach or purge. It began, simply, with the absence of a message. The command relay from Central Vox Tower Theta missed its scheduled transmission. Only by 12 minutes at first common, enough to ignore. But then the second message failed. Then the third. By the fourth cycle, the barracks still stood at attention, eyes unblinking. waiting for orders that would never come. The servitors continued their patrols, but slower now. Their pathing routines looped without variation. One tripped against a wall it had passed 100 times. It did not correct course. It simply began walking into it, over and over, servo joints grinding softly into the ferrocrete. No correction was issued by the next rotation. The rations did not arrive, and no one complained, because no one remembered how the soldiers stood in formation for 14 hours. No dismissal, no commands. Their boots sank slightly into the ash-drifted plaza, the dust rising around their ankles like fog from a dying world. A child crossed the courtyard once, barefoot, dragging a string behind her. No one stopped her. No one saluted. At 0300, someone finally spoke. "Do we dig?" The question wasn't directed at anyone, but someone nodded, not from authority, but because there was nothing else left to do. Shovels were retrieved, not issued retrieved. Old tools, forgotten beneath stairwells, buried in collapsed hab chambers. The soldiers began to dig, not graves, not trenches, just holes, deep, ordered. In rows they didn't speak as they worked, but the rhythm returned, that same silent cadence they had learned during the earliest drills. Step, brace, shovel, toss, repeat. Someone asked, softly, "Who are they for?" And another answered, "All of it." The banners had not fallen, they had simply faded. The cloth that once bore Varen's face had grown brittle with ash. No order was given to replace them. No priest declared their decay symbolic. They simply curled inward, peeling back into the windless sky like skin under heat. In the manufactorum, the Baneblade virtue through purge stopped groaning, not because it had been repaired, because it had nothing left to mourn. Its engine shut down with a soft, final sigh. The priest assigned to monitor it walked away, not reassigned, not dismissed. He just walked out of the forge, out of doctrine, into the quiet in the chapel district. The statues remained, but the ember accepted no longer attended them. Their red robes hung on the pews now, draped like drying skin, brittle and unstirred. One by one, the chapel's lumen strips failed. The voice of the Father of Fire did not speak again, and the incense urns grew cold. No decree, no purge, no heresy, just absence. Varen remained where he had always been, deep in the command sanctum, surrounded by maps that no longer updated. Reports arrive, but no longer parsed. His servoscribes broke down from disuse. His vox-link pulsed with static. His hands, once precise, began to tremble. He issued an order. It was not received. He issued another. It went nowhere then. Nothing. He did not scream. He did not curse. He simply sat and waited for someone to obey. No one disobeyed. They simply stopped waiting. Outside, the ash fell thicker now. No atmospheric shift. No orbital change. It simply accumulated. As if drawn by gravity of memory, the graves deepened. One soldier carved names into stone, not for people, for places. Sector 3, Gamma, Detritus. 17-Delta.archive. Null.ashroom.b.no. One stopped her. Another painted a circle on her helmet. Then another followed, and another, until the soldiers stood, shovels in hand, blank banners above, with circles drawn in soot over where the Aquila had once been. They did not know what it meant, but they knew it wasn't wrong. A servitor wandered into the plaza. It stared at the holes. Then stepped into one and powered down. No one moved to retrieve it. At dusk, the sky above Carthus Ultimo shimmered, not with light, with memory. A soft vibration in the statica sensation felt more than seen. Some turned their heads, others wept, without sound. One whispered Island, not shouted, not praised, just remembered. In the command sanctum, Varen stood. He walked to the center of the room. His boots echoed once, then fell silent. The ash had reached the inside. He raised his hand, paused, then lowered it. He did not speak again, because there was no one left to listen, not in defiance, in completion. Outside, the last shovel struck metal, hard, hollow, a vault, a door. No one opened it. They kept digging, because that's what was left. Not glory, not vengeance, only motion, only rhythm, only remembrance. Disguised as work, and when the ash finally stopped falling, not because of a storm, not because of wind, but because it had run out of memory to carry, the world did not change. It simply remained still, quiet, and unfinished.